Hi, welcome to the Navigating Neurodiversity podcast. I'm Vivien, registered psychologist, and today I've invited a certified reading specialist, Dr. Anne-Marie Tan, to talk to us all about literacy development. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Vivien.
Yes. Okay, so a little bit about Anne-Marie. She has a doctoral degree in cognitive studies in education with a focus on reading research. So Anne-Marie has worked with students in New York, as well as at international schools in Singapore. Currently, Anne-Marie is providing support to students in reading, writing, and comprehension, and I will link her website down below. All right, so let's get started. So Anne-Marie, in Singapore, I think a lot of us are very familiar with terms like English tutors and tuition, and perhaps less familiar with the role of a reading specialist. So for the benefit of our viewers, maybe you could start off with telling us a little bit about, the role of a reading specialist.
Sure. So a reading specialist works with struggling readers and helps them be able to close those gaps in literacy. So what a reading specialist does is at the beginning, they'll take a look at the student and they'll do a couple of informal assessments. That could encompass phonological awareness, spelling, reading, listening comprehension, and then based on all these different areas, we'll come up with the intervention to help address those needs for students.
Yes, thanks for that. So, could you, of all the things that you could do, right, tell us a bit about what sparked your interest, like why reading specialist?
So I was in the PhD program at Teachers College, which is the School of Education at Columbia University, and I was in this very theoretical program. So content studies in education looks at how kids learn, think, and develop and underlying processes. And I was really fascinated by that. But I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted to pursue a life and a profession in academia. So my mother, who is an educator, who has been educated for more than 50 years, said, if you're not quite sure, do something practical. So the PhD always drills you into using research-based strategies. So I was thinking, okay, I love teaching reading. I was working and volunteering my time with inner city students. What can I do with this? So I was looking at Teachers College programs, and the Master's as a reading specialist program popped up. And I loved how it looked at being able to assess children's needs and then using research-based strategies to help these kids close those gaps and become successful readers.
Wow, yeah, that's wonderful. Tell us a bit about your experience working with inner city kids.
So oftentimes I was just volunteering my time over there, and we would just read with the kids, and then from reading with the kids, we would try to assess, what are their needs? Do they need work in fluency? Do they need work on decoding skills? And then from there, just try to get them to just love reading.
Yeah. So working on the motivational for reading, as well as breaking down reading into the various components. Yeah. So maybe we want to talk about some of the early signs of reading difficulties that parents or teachers could look out for.
Right. So oftentimes people think, BD reversals, that's a first-time dyslexia. Well, it's not always the case because it's normal for kids to reverse their B's and D's up to, for example, primary 1. But when I work with kids and I notice that in comparison to their peers, they're much more slower at being able to learn those sight words, being able to decode those words, being able to sound out the words in a word like cat, going k, at, or cap, k, a, m, being able to distinguish those beginning blends and ending blends. And when particularly I see that they have really strong listening comprehension skills, but there's some sort of gap between their listening comprehension skills and their reading comprehension skills. And I'm thinking, we need to take a little closer look at that and see what's going on. And then that's when I would refer to someone like yourself.
Yeah. So looking out for those discrepancies, right? That a child who can speak and really comprehend really well verbally, but having trouble with actually learning the script. So I want to talk a bit about phonological awareness because that's something that comes up a lot among children with reading difficulties like dyslexia, right? How do you support those kids, when they come to you and you know that they've got really weak phonological awareness? How do you build up those skills?
So when you think about phonological awareness, it's a big umbrella term of being able to hear the sounds in the English language. And that can be breaking up sentences, breaking up words, breaking up a word into an onset and rhyme, so cat, k, at, or breaking up it into phonemes, the smallest unit of sound, like k, at. So some of the things that you could do is being able to play phonological awareness games, having them listen to rhyming songs like Jack and Jill, having them being able to use alconem boxes and manipulatives and give them words with a picture, for example, sun, and then have them break out those letter sounds into individual sounds, or being able to play games like throwing a ball and having them break up the sound with that. So for example, if I do the word camp, they would go k, a, m, p. So something fun like that where they're
Yes.
up and they're moving around.
Yeah. So the use of like really
Yeah.
multisensory
Yes.
approaches
Yeah.
really helps that. Okay, and there are kids I see that where they do really well on spelling tests because especially in local schools, right? They test the spelling on a weekly basis. There is a word list that they could prepare for and memorize. But actually, when you look at their free writing, spontaneous writing, they're making a lot of errors. What are your thoughts on that when parents see that in their child?
So I think the first thing we need to address is, are they being taught spelling in a scope and sequence? Are they being taught phonics in that program? So I think some schools, if they don't teach in a structured manner in terms of a scope and sequence for spelling, where you're doing your CVC words and your blends and your vowel teams and then those higher morphology Greek and Latin roots, then you start to see more of those gaps. So I would say making sure that you're teaching a spelling program which teaches those phonics rules. Because oftentimes these kids, they may be really good readers and they can score really well for their spelling test, but they may not have those underlying understanding of those phoneme sounds or the graphemes.
Yes.
And then being able to then look at the spelling words that they don't know and what are those phonograms that they don't know. So being able to understand that and then apply it to writing. So can you do dictation sentences with those spelling words so that they can apply it to their writing skills as well?
Yes, coming from the local school system myself, right? I don't recall my teachers ever teaching spelling explicitly, and I think that's still the case today, just because there's so much to cover in the curriculum, right? How do you find time to actually teach? So spelling, I think, is something that's frequently tested, but not necessarily taught in a very, very explicit manner. So I'm just curious, like, because you've worked in international schools in Singapore, is that something that teachers would teach students explicitly, like how to spell, what are the spelling strategies that you should use?
Yeah, I would say that many of the international schools do teach spelling skills explicitly, and they'll link it to a phonics program. So what they used to do would be Words Their Way, for example, by Bears and Infernesi, which is a great way to be able to assess which spelling stage a kid is in, and then being able to address, these are the phonograms that I need to work under that stage.
I see.
Yeah, so when I was working at NIE and I was teaching a couple of teachers, I'm like, please, when you get out there, use some sort of spelling diagnostic so that you know where your kids are. And then from there, you can take a look at the phonograms and the different types of spelling rules they need to learn in order to be successful spellers.
Yes. And we know that spelling is just one of the many, many components. I mean, writing is a very complex process, from the basic skills to the higher order thinking and idea generation and planning and organization. And spelling is just one component. How would you teach, how do you teach writing when it's just so broad? Like, where do you start?
So I think reading and writing are always interlinked. And so is expressive language. So oftentimes kids with dysgraphia may not be able to express themselves in the way they write. So I think it's really important to be able to get them to jot down and talk about their writing. So I love the brain frames from Bonnie Singers. She works with kids with dysgraphia, and she has mind maps or brain frames. And she has brain frames of different types of writing, whether it's sequential, problem solving, and cause and effect. So she has these brain frames, and depending on the writing task, she'll help kids explain their thinking and fit their thoughts into these different brain frames depending on what kind of writing they're doing. So then they're more able to be able to look at their plan and then start writing it down.
Right. And when they're writing, do you correct for spelling, or do you, because in the local schools, again, sometimes we say, well, just focus on content. So there is a content score, and then there is a spelling score as well. Is that what you do? Or?
So usually, like, we all heard of COPs, you take a look at the capital letters, the organization, punctuation, spelling. So we try to get them to get their ideas down first and then go back and edit any mistakes they have, including spelling.
Yes. So the first stage would be focusing just on idea generation, just getting those thoughts out. Because what we tend to see is that if they're so focused on, the mechanics of writing, that can stop them from actually expressing their ideas, because they only want to use words that they know how to spell. And if they don't, they try to, use something else. So we don't want that to happen, right? We want them to really get their voice on paper and then do the editing after that. Okay. How about reluctant readers? Because we've got parents who say, they've been trying to get their child to move on to chapter books, but the kid is stuck at Dogman, comics, a lot of like
Right.
picture books. Like, what are some suggestions you have to move them along and get them interested
Right.
in?
So when I work with struggling readers and resistant readers, I always ask them, well, what do you like to read about? Is it about sports? Is it about animals? Is it about fairies? So I'll start from there, and even getting the books to be more engaging, like opening the book up, whether it's a pop-up book, so it's more engaging, it's more entertaining for them. And then if they're reluctant readers, start reading together with them, having them talk about the book, having that verbal language and that storytelling piece come in, so that you're asking them what's the story about, and they're more engaged with like what's happening to the character, what is the character feeling, why, what is the character learning, how are they changing over time.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like when you do shared book reading with them, you're really focusing on the ideas and the content and the
Yeah.
understanding of the
Yes,
story.
it's not just decoding, it's also
Yeah, and
comprehension as well.
right, right. So, do you have tips for parents? Because we often say read with your child, read with them at
Yeah.
home. Is there like a right way of doing it? Because, some parents will be like, well, if they make a mistake, do I stop? Do I teach them the word? Do I get them to decode, or do I
Yes.
just move on and.
So there's different types of reading strategies out there that work. I wouldn't say there's one particular one. You find the one that works for your child. So one of them, for example, would be echo reading, where you're reading a sentence and then they're following along with you. There's a neurological impress method, where you're reading a book with the child and you're reading at a slightly faster rate and they're following along with their finger. And then there's also the pause, prompt, and praise. So you're reading with the child, they're pointing to the book, and when they come across a word that they don't know, you could prompt them, like, what is that word? What makes sense? What is the beginning letter of that sound? Can you blend it out? Can you look at the context pictures to help you with that word?
Right.
Does that make sense when the word that you said, does that fit into that sentence? So
Yes,
different types of
yes.
strategies.
Sure. So
Different
there's a
types.
variety, and
Yeah.
they can try it out and see what works best for their
Yeah.
child. Yeah. So obviously you work with lots of different students, and some might make faster progress than others. What are some factors that you see might influence this rate of progress?
So when we work with kids, I think it's definitely a partnership between the parents, me and the student.
Yeah.
And I find the kids that have the most growth are the ones who have that consistency in practicing the concepts that they are learning in class. So whether it's phonics, doing or reading a book, having that consistent practice like every day, whether it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes a day.
Yeah, yeah. So you have sessions with them weekly? Is it like a weekly
I
class?
do.
Okay.
I
So
do.
in between, you would recommend like having short practice
Yes.
sessions for,
So
yeah.
yes, I give homework.
Yes,
Which is
yes.
not always popular, and sometimes you do have resistant students, and oftentimes that puts pressure on that dynamic between the parent and the child. We definitely don't want that, but if your child is
Yeah.
willing to work with you, and you have that consistent practice, I definitely see a lot quicker pace in growth and
Yeah,
the
for
ability
sure.
to
Yeah.
benchmark a lot faster.
Yes. And I feel like it applies to almost every skill that you want to
Yes.
pick up, right? That
Yes.
consistent, because that's going to form those connections in the
Yeah,
brain.
I always tell them, do you know that like Olympic swimmer in Singapore? What's his name? Joseph.
Jonas
Joseph
Schooling.
Schooling. Do you think he just practiced swimming 1 hour a day, or like
Exactly.
half an hour a day? He
Yeah.
took several hours a day. Am I asking you to do this for 7 hours? No, it's just 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you do like reward charts with them?
I
Do you
do.
get them? Okay.
I do like reward charts. I have like a little treasure box. They get a pizza party at the end, just to have the external motivation.
Yes,
Because once they have
exactly.
that there, and they start, being motivated to do those practice sessions, to practice their reading, to practice their spelling, then you can take away those motivation parts, because
Yeah.
they don't need it anymore. It's a lot easier for them.
Yeah, so it's the same, we see that here as well, that they just need to experience some success.
Yes.
But before that success comes, we kind of need some external rewards to, give them a boost, get them going. I also want to get your thoughts on like non-responders. There's a lot of literature on, non-responders, meaning they've kind of gone through an evidence-based program, but they're making much less progress than expected. Have you had students like that, and what would be your recommendation?
So when I take a look at different programs and when I work with kids, there is no perfect program. So you're always, as an educator, pulling from your bag of tricks, like different types of programs, mushing it together, figure out what works for your child.
Yeah.
So if they're not responding to one particular program, what other tools and tricks can you use to input into the intervention plan to help them be successful? So finding out what their area of gaps are, what they need to work on, and then pulling different strategies that might work for that child. If one strategy didn't work, let's try another strategy. Let's try a different program.
Yes, yes. So meaning, when they get labeled a non-responder, it might just be that whatever they've received does not work for them. It doesn't mean, so you have to try other methods and other approaches
So
as
I'm
well.
an eternal optimist. Something will work. You, as an educator, you're not going to be perfect the first time. Let's just try and work out what works for this child so that they're successful in reading, writing, or spelling.
Yes. So I've heard this from some educational therapists, that, okay, we start with the phonological approach, like Orton Gillingham or something. But when that doesn't work, then they might go via the visual route. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think, when they do the visual route, oftentimes they'll do, like, for example, Lyndon McBell, Seeing Stars. They'll do Orton Gillingham, which I have to say Orton Gillingham is trying to implement some of those components. So I think a good spelling program would be something, or for a non-responder, would be something that combines both, like the visual component where you're working on that orthographic processing, and also the reading component where you have that decoding process. So when I say, there is no perfect program, you're pulling from these different programs to make it a good program for that child.
Yes. Okay. The next question is a little bit broader about schools, and obviously, you can't. It's hard for you to speak for every school, right? But in general, do you think there are things that our schools could do better in terms of literacy support?
So I think DAS does a wonderful job at training the teachers, the parents and educators in Singapore. I love the fact that they're working at the Orton Gillingham program. They're using research-based strategies. I think sometimes it'd be great if we can kind of implement those types of strategies within the school. And so kids don't always have to go outside after school for these different types of reading programs. They can be available at school, and these different types of educators can now marry it into the curriculum. How we can embed these different strategies within the curriculum so kids are learning these different strategies as part of the writing or the reading or the comprehension program at school.
Yes. Do you mean like even in the regular education
Because I think
classroom?
Even the Orton Gillingham program was created in New York for struggling readers. A lot of these rules and a lot of these spelling phonograms and these Greek and Latin roots, all kids would benefit from them. And I think if we embed it more into the curriculum of any school, I think it would be you would see better growth, I think, for all kids.
Yes, so kind of like bringing all down to tier one, right? Because
tier
right
one,
now, okay. But from what I hear you're saying, actually in the international schools, they do some of this in the tier one, in the general classroom, right? Yeah. So top tips for parents whose child is struggling with either reading or writing, what are some things they could do at home?
I think, one thing is be patient, loving, and understanding. I think it's really easy as parents and educators to just be, you've seen is 5 times all over this page, and they forget. So I think just pretend that you are learning Egyptian hieroglyphics, for the first time. It's going to be hard for you, and it's going to be hard, like reading for your child. So just be patient, and I think understanding what the gaps are. When you're reading with a child, is it a comprehension gap? Is it a decoding gap? Is it a phonological awareness gap? And then address, those different types of needs.
Yes. So I suppose, for a regular parent, it can be quite hard for them to do that. So they would have to go to someone like you or the teacher or someone who can advise them on exactly what the gaps are.
So I would say, like, for parents that don't know much about this, well, you have your basic sight words. All kids have to have those fry or adult sight words that they have to be able to memorize right away. And then it's being able to second decode those words. So starting with consonant, vowel, consonant, blending out, go cat. Instead of going at cat. Sometimes your kids might have poor working memory. They can't hold on to all those sounds. So blending them one at a time. And also being able to help them chunk out larger words. Like, where can I break the word up so they can be able to access those longer words?
Yes. I wanted to ask about irregular words as well, whether, what are the strategies that you recommend, for words that are really hard to sound out?
So oftentimes it would be good for them to maybe tap out the sound. So for example, do, duh, ooh, and then map it out using cone boxes and manipulative. So duh, ooh, and then graph it. So what you can use it with magnetic letters, manipulatives, or with writing. So you would duh, ooh, and this O usually doesn't say, it usually says O, but here it says ooh. So when you write it, duh, ooh, what letters make the duh sound? Oh, it's D. What letter makes the ooh sound? Oh, it's the O. So marking out those irregularities and making it very obvious for the child, so then they're able to recognize those irregularities, and it becomes more automatic for them the more they're able to write it and read it and find it in context of a book.
Yes, yes. Another common one we see would be words like differentiating the then and the then,
Yeah.
THEN and AN, or like two and two, TO and TOO.
So then I think that's when grammar comes in. Then you have to teach the homophones, two words that sound the same, but they could be spelled differently and they can mean different things. So I think that's when you teach them, okay, well, then is, what happens next? Then is when you're comparing two things and, highlighting those irregularities when you have those two words side to side and then putting them in the context of a sentence so they know when to use it.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. Thanks so much, Emery.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. If you've got any further questions for Emery, you can put them down in the comments below. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Am I okay? I don't know. There's nothing much I can do right now.